As we continue our study of the literary elements used by authors to write their works, we need to look at point of view. So what is point of view? In literary terms, let's be sure we first understand what point of view is not. First of all, it's not an opinion. Sometimes we ask people what their point of view is on a topic, like what's your point of view on who's going to be the best president, or what's your point of view on abortion, or any number of topics. That is not what point of view is in literary terms. It is also not the author's purpose in telling a story. An author's purpose might be to persuade or entertain or to inform the reader, but that is not what point of view is. No, point of view, when discussed in literary terms, is the way in which the author tells the story to the reader or the vantage point from which the story is told. A more formal definition from dictionary.com states it in another way. The position of the narrator in relation to the story is indicated by the narrator's outlook from which the events are depicted and by the attitude toward the characters. But that's a mouthful, and I don't expect you to remember the definition as much as I want you to understand what point of view really means. So as a reader, we should ask, who is telling the story? Is it the main character telling their own story? Or is a narrator telling the story to the reader and letting the reader in on one or more characters' thoughts, feelings, or ideas? And how much are they telling us? There are four literary points of view to consider, but we are really only going to consider three. Let's identify them first. First of all, there's first person. There's second person, which is a point of view, but it's not used in narrative, but sometimes used in poetry. So we won't really discuss that. The last two are third person, that's third person limited, or third person omniscient. So let's look at first person first. When we read a story and ask ourselves who is telling the story, the first person point of view is pretty easy to identify. We can open a book, look at the first page, and we will see most likely the personal pronouns I, me, we, or us. We will see that early in the narrative, usually on the first page or so. A first-person point of view is told by I and gives the viewpoint of the main character or the protagonist. In To Kill a Mockingbird, which we've just finished reading, we know that it was told in the first person by its main character, Scout Finch. If, however, we open a book and the story is being told about a character or characters, then the point of view is a little bit more difficult to determine. There are two possibilities, third person limited and third person omniscient. Let's discuss third person limited. This point of view is told by a narrator who will let the reader in on the thoughts of one character, the protagonist, but is telling the story about that character. The pronouns used will be he or she in reference to that character, and the characters will only identify themselves as I in the dialogue. In the third person omniscient point of view, the narrator is also telling the story, but in this case, the narrator lets the reader in on the thoughts of all or some of characters as needed to advance the plot. This narrator is all-knowing, meaning that the narrator knows what all of the characters are thinking and can tell the readers what we need to know as the story goes along. The pronouns used will also be the third person pronouns like he, she, and they, and again, I will only be used in dialogue. The help, which we also just finished reading, was told in the third person omniscient point of view. So what's the big deal about point of view? If you look at the slide I've included here, it says as soon as we are privy to the feelings or thoughts or perceptions of a character, point of view shifts to that character. And as Atticus Finch said, you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. Getting into the character's skin and seeing things from their point of view helps us to understand them and the way they understand the issues in the plot. We as readers can be sympathetic or unsympathetic to the characters based on how we react to the thoughts, feelings, and motivations that we learn through point of view. In order to understand the importance of point of view in telling a story or creating a theme, I want us to examine these two novels that we just finished, To Kill a Mockingbird and The Help. Though we recognize the similar themes of racism and bullying, the way in which the authors convey these themes is quite different because of their use of point of view. First of all, let's look at To Kill a Mockingbird. Though told by an adult scout as a flashback to her childhood, we are still limited to issues of racism and bullying as seen and heard through the eyes and ears of 6-year-old Scout. We are limited by her naivete and our own imaginations. On the other hand, Catherine Stockett, in her novel The Help, uses the voice of many adult characters to discuss those same issues, and she uses the third-person omniscient point of view. Now, I know you will open your books and see that there are many first-person chapters because Stockett chose to give the characters a first-person voice. However, let me remind you that because we as readers are told the thoughts of not only Skeeter, but Abilene, Minnie, and later in the book, the high society men and women at the benefit as they expand their prejudice to include the low-class Celia Foote, this narration is most definitely third-person omniscient point of view. So now your assignment is to give a voice through point of view. I want you to try your hand at it. Both Harper Lee and Catherine Stockett, albeit white authors, tried to tell a story of racism in the Deep South. Stockett chose to give a voice to the African American maids in her story, and in that way refocus the reader's attention on those characters' thoughts and motivations. How could Harper Lee's story have been different if she'd done the same for the Finch's house servant Calpurnia, and Tom Robinson, the black man accused of raping a white woman? What would Cal have said to the sassy scout who called her a racial slur? Would she have let the reader know her feelings about working for the Finches and the hoity-toity Aunt Alexandra? What were the real thoughts of Tom Robinson as he waited in the jail for his trial? What did Tom think of Atticus, who risked his life as he guarded Tom in the jail, and also risked his standing in the community by defending Tom in the courtroom? Your assignment is to choose a scene from the novel and rewrite the passage in third-person omniscient, so that we as readers might understand the feelings and thoughts of those characters who weren't given a voice. I want you to help the reader shift their focus from one character to another. No longer will we focus on Scout, though she may be part of the passage, but instead we will get in the skin of Calpurnia or Tom and see the issues from their eyes, knowing their thoughts, fears, and motivations. Surprise me. Make me understand how the black person in Macomb, Mississippi in 1935 would feel during the events that are taking place at that time. I look forward to reading your new submissions to Kill a Mockingbird.